My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat across from the banker in that quiet Virginia branch, watching his face drain of color as he stared at the small, yellowed business card that had slipped from my purse. The card was older than some marriages, creased at the corners, ink faded to a pale shadow of what it once was, but the name was still clear. Charles Reeves, Reeves Building Supply. The banker, Mr. Price, his nameplate read, picked up the card like it was made of glass. His lips parted. His eyes went wide, then soft, then something I couldn't name. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. I blinked through the fog of exhaustion and heartbreak that had been my constant companion for weeks. "That's my father's card. He passed 26 years ago." He set the card down gently, reverently, and when he looked at me again, there were tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. "Miss Reeves," he said, voice thick, "your father saved my life." I didn't understand. I couldn't, not yet. Because just 60 seconds earlier, this same man had told me I was financially destroyed, that my ex-husband had forged my name on a loan worth nearly $200,000, that my credit was shredded, that I was legally tied to debts I never knew existed. I had walked into that bank with $53 to my name, 2 suitcases in a motel room, and a daughter who had chosen her father over the truth. I thought I had lost everything, but something was about to shift. Something I never could have predicted. Mr. Price leaned forward, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady and certain in a way that made my chest tighten. "Miss Reeves, I'm going to help you, and before we're done, you're going to understand just how much your father's legacy is worth." I didn't know what he meant, not yet. But I could feel it, the air in that small room changing, the weight of my despair cracking just enough to let in a sliver of light. Before I tell you what happened next, before I explain how a quiet banker and an old business card unraveled decades of lies and betrayal, you need to know how I ended up sitting in that chair. You need to know what my ex-husband took from me. And you need to know why my own daughter stood by and watched him do it. I met Jerome when I was 24 years old, fresh out of graduate school, with a library science degree and a head full of dreams about quiet rooms filled with books and children who loved to read. He walked into the community center in New Jersey where I was volunteering one Saturday afternoon. Tall, confident, the kind of smile that made you forget what you were about to say. My mother used to tell me, "Baby, some man can talk their way into your heart before they even sit down." Jerome was that kind of man. We dated for 8 months. Fast, maybe too fast, but I was young, and he made me feel like I was the only woman in any room we entered. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in March. No ring yet. Just him on one knee in my tiny apartment kitchen, saying he couldn't wait another day to make me his wife. We married that summer. Within a year, we moved back to Maryland to be closer to my parents. My father owned a small construction supply company. Nothing fancy, just honest work. He sold lumber, drywall, tools. He knew every contractor in 3 counties by their first name. People trusted him. They still brought up his name years after he passed, always with respect, always with a softness in their voice. My mother was a seamstress, quiet, steady, the kind of woman who never raised her voice but could cut through nonsense with one look. Jerome liked being near them, or at least I thought he did. What I didn't realize then was that Jerome liked proximity only when it served him. He liked the reputation my father had built. He liked the connections. He liked the way people in town looked at me, at us, like we were a respectable young couple building something real. But respect doesn't pay bills. And Jerome always wanted more than we had. My father passed when I was 32.
heart attack. Sudden. The kind of loss that rearranges your understanding of the world. He left behind very little money. The business barely broke even most years. But he left something more valuable than cash. A name people remembered, a reputation for doing right by others, even when it cost him. My mother lasted 5 more years after that. Grief, I think, just wore her down. She got quieter, smaller, until one morning she didn't wake up. That's when everything changed. Or maybe that's when I finally started seeing what had always been there. Jerome became colder, restless. He started talking about business ideas, big ones, wild ones, the kind that required money we didn't have. He'd come home with brochures, spreadsheets, plans that never quite made sense, but sounded exciting when he explained them. He needed me to co-sign things, just for convenience, he'd say, just to help me get started. I signed because I loved him. I signed because I believed him. I signed because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. Our daughter Nia was growing up watching all of it. She saw her father charm strangers at the grocery store and snap at me in the car on the way home. She saw him smile at church and ignore my questions about where the money was going. But she loved him desperately, the way children do when they don't yet understand that love and loyalty aren't the same thing. So I swallowed the hurt. I swallowed the confusion. I swallowed 34 years of small betrayals that I told myself didn't matter because we were still a family, until the day I found out our joint savings account was empty. Every penny, gone. Jerome had drained it without telling me. He'd used the money to invest in a trucking business owned by a woman named Latrice, someone he called just a friend. A woman who laughed too long at his jokes and called him Jay like she'd known him longer than I had. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny taking the money. He denied me. He said I was ungrateful, unsupportive, that I was acting like an old woman stuck in the past. 2 months later, he filed for divorce. And I realized something that made my stomach turn. He'd been planning this for a long time, maybe years, maybe since my mother died and there was no one left to see through him.
The divorce process felt like being pulled apart slowly. My lawyer, a kind woman named Miss Thornton, who worked out of a small office in Annapolis, kept using words like complex and difficult to untangle. She explained that Jerome had refinanced our house twice, both times using my signature. But I didn't sign anything, I told her. She looked at me with a sadness that told me she'd seen this before. He forged your name. We'll prove it, but it's going to take time. Time I didn't have. Jerome fought dirty. He twisted facts in court, made me sound irrational, painted himself as the hard-working husband who'd been held back by a wife who didn't understand ambition. He had his lawyer, a sharp-dressed man who smiled too much, present documents I'd never seen, agreements I'd never made. And through it all, Nia sat on his side of the courtroom. My daughter, my only child, sitting with him. I told myself she didn't understand, that he was manipulating her the way he'd manipulated me for decades, that eventually she'd see the truth. But then came the worst day. The day the divorce was finalized, I was in the house we'd lived in for 29 years, packing my things into 2 suitcases. I was holding a framed photo of my mother, her face soft, smiling, the way I remembered her before grief took her, when I heard the front door open. Nia walked in. She didn't hug me, didn't ask how I was doing. She just stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "Mom, Dad says you need to leave today." My hands froze on the frame. Today? The judge gave me 30 days. He doesn't want things to get messy. I turned to face her. Baby, this is still my home. Her jaw tightened. Not anymore. There was no softness in her voice, no hesitation. She looked at me like I was a problem she needed to solve, not her mother. Mia, please, I need time to figure out where I'm going. You've had time. Something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet final breaking. I zipped the suitcases slowly. I picked up my mother's photo. I walked past my daughter without saying another word because I didn't trust my voice not to shatter completely. She didn't stop me. She didn't apologize. She just watched me leave. I drove across the state line into Virginia and checked into an extended stay motel just outside Richmond, the kind of place where people don't ask questions and the walls are thin enough to hear other people's lives falling apart too. I had $53 in my checking account. Everything else? Gone. Jerome had drained it all. Accounts I thought were protected. Savings I thought were safe. I sat on the edge of that motel bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, and I thought about my mother. About how she used to say, "Baby, the Lord won't put more on you than you can carry." I wanted to believe her, but I felt buried. 3 days later, I decided I needed to open a new bank account. Something small, something that was mine. A place to start over, even if I was starting with almost nothing. I found a branch in Richmond, Sunfield Bank. It looked quiet, clean, the kind of place where no one would judge me for having nothing. I walked in with my envelope of documents, Social Security card, driver's license, and tucked in the back, my father's old business card. I'd kept it all these years, not for any real reason, just a reminder of a time when the world made sense. I didn't know it then, but that card was about to change everything. The inside of Sunfield Bank smelled like old paper and wood polish, soft yellow lights, quiet voices, the kind of place that felt safe. I needed safe. A woman at the front desk smiled and asked me to wait. I sat in one of those stiff chairs near the window, watching people walk by on the street outside. People with jobs, with lives that hadn't collapsed. "Miss Reeves?" I looked up. The man standing there was slim, maybe in his early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm expression. His nameplate read, Carlton Price, account manager. "I'm here to open a new account," I said quietly as I followed him to his desk. "Of course. Let me pull up your information and we'll get started." He typed my name into his computer, clicked a few times. Then his eyebrows drew together slightly. "Just a moment," he said. He clicked again, then again. His expression shifted. Subtle, but I'd spent enough years reading people's faces to know when something was wrong. "Ms. Reeves," he paused, like he was choosing his words carefully. "I'm seeing some activity on your credit file that I need to ask you about." My stomach tightened. "What kind of activity?" He turned the screen slightly so I could see. Numbers, names, dates. "It appears you're listed as a co-debtor on a business loan taken out 6 years ago. The balance is $188,000. The room tilted. "A what?" "A loan for a trucking company. It shows your name, your social security number, and your signature on the original documents." I stared at the screen, but the words blurred together. "I didn't sign for any loan." Mr. Price's voice softened. "Ma'am, according to this, you did." My hand started trembling, not from cold, from something deeper. From the realization that Jerome hadn't just taken my money, he'd taken my identity. He'd forged my name and tied me to debts I never knew existed. "There's more," Mr. Price said gently. He clicked through another screen. "Several credit cards in your name, all maxed out. It looks like they were opened over the past 4 years." I couldn't breathe right, couldn't think straight. Years. He'd been doing this for years, planning, forging, stealing. And I hadn't known. How could I have been so blind? Mr. Price handed me a tissue. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the wetness on my face. "Is there someone who had access to your personal information? Someone who might have used your identity without your knowledge?" "My ex-husband," I whispered. "We just finalized the divorce." He nodded slowly, like pieces were falling into place.
This happens more often than people realize. Spousal fraud is one of the hardest things to catch because the trust is already there. Trust. I almost laughed. Almost. What do I do? I asked, my voice barely holding together. We can file a fraud report. You'll need to cooperate with investigators, and it's going to be a long process. But if this wasn't you, there are ways to fight it. I felt the weight of everything crushing down on me. The divorce, the eviction, Naya turning her back, and now this, financial ruin I didn't cause, but would have to spend years undoing. I reached into my purse for more tissues, and that's when it happened. My father's old business card slipped out and landed on the desk. Mr. Price reached for it automatically, the way you do when something falls. But the moment his eyes landed on the name, he froze, completely still. His face went pale. He whispered, "Charles Reeves?" I nodded, confused. My father, he passed 26 years ago. Mr. Price slowly lowered himself back into his chair. His hands were shaking now, too. "Ms. Reeves," he took off his glasses, wiped out his eyes. "Your father saved my life."
I didn't understand. What do you mean? Mr. Price held the card like it was something holy. His voice cracked when he spoke. When I was 17, I worked summers at Reeves Building Supply, stacking lumber, moving inventory. I had a juvenile record, petty theft, stupid kid stuff, and no one else would hire me. He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed. Your father gave me a chance when everyone else saw a criminal. My throat tightened. One afternoon, a shelf collapsed. Hundreds of pounds of lumber. Your father pushed me out of the way. He touched his shoulder like the memory still lived there. The doctor said he saved me from permanent injury, maybe worse. I couldn't speak. He didn't just give me a job, Miss Reeves. He spoke to me like I mattered, like I had a future. He wrote my college recommendation letter. He told me I was smart enough to do something with my life. A tear slid down his cheek. If it weren't for your father, I wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be anything. He placed the card down gently, reverently, and looked at me with a determination I hadn't seen before. Miss Reeves, I'm going to help you. I don't care how long it takes or how complicated it gets. Your father believed in me when no one else did. Now it's my turn. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. Hope. Faint, fragile, but real. Mr. Price stood up quickly, composure returning. Wait here, please. He disappeared through a door behind the teller stations, leaving me alone with my father's business card and a confusion that felt heavier than the grief. When he returned 5 minutes later, he wasn't alone. A woman walked beside him, mid-50s, sharp gray suit, the kind of expression that told you she didn't waste time on nonsense. Her heels clicked against the tile floor with authority. Miss Reeves, this is Daria Holt. She's our senior fraud specialist. Miss Holt extended her hand. Her grip was firm, professional. Mr. Price briefed me on your situation. I've reviewed the preliminary files, and I believe we have grounds to investigate financial fraud and identity theft. She didn't smile, but her eyes weren't cold. They were focused. I need you to come with us to a private meeting room. We're going to go through everything. Every document, every signature, every transaction. It's going to take time, and some of what we find might be difficult to hear. Are you prepared for that? I nodded because I didn't trust my voice.
They led me down a hallway to a small conference room with a long table and chairs that looked more expensive than anything I'd owned in years. Mr. Price brought water. Miss Holt brought files, thick manila folders that landed on the table with a weight that made my chest tighten. "Let's start with the loan," she said, opening the first folder. She spread documents across the table. Loan applications, signature pages, tax returns I'd never seen. "This is the original application for the trucking business loan. $188,000, approved 6 years ago." She pointed to a signature at the bottom. "Is this your signature?" I leaned forward, squinting at the ink. It looked like my name, but something about it felt wrong. The loops were too wide, the pressure too uneven. "I don't think so," I said slowly. Miss Hope pulled out another document, a photocopy of my driver's license from a bank file years ago. "This is your actual signature from your previous account application." She placed them side by side. The difference was obvious. "Whoever forged this did a poor job mimicking pen pressure," she said almost clinically. "They got the shape mostly right, but signatures aren't just about appearance. It's about rhythm, pressure points, speed." She pulled out more documents, credit card applications, a second mortgage I never knew existed, each one with a version of my name that wasn't quite mine. "Your ex-husband had access to all your personal documents?" she asked. "Yes, we were married for 34 years. "Did you ever sign blank forms, papers he told you were for taxes or household business?" I thought back, tried to remember. "Maybe. I don't know. He always handled the finances." Miss Holt nodded like she'd heard this 1,000 times. "That's the setup. Get you to sign one legitimate document, then use it as a template for everything else." Mr. Price, who'd been quiet, leaned forward. "How far back does this go?" Miss Holt flipped through another folder. "At least 8 years, based on what I'm seeing here. But there's something else." She pulled out a bank statement. Not from Sunfield, from a different institution. "This is an account your ex-husband opened 3 years ago. It's under his name, but look at the deposit history." I scanned the numbers. Large deposits. 30,000, 15,000, 22,000. "Where did that money come from?" I asked. Miss Holt's expression darkened. "From the trucking business, the one financed with the loan in your name." My stomach dropped. "So he took out a loan using my credit to fund a business and pocketed the profits?" "That's exactly what he did." I felt sick. Miss Holt turned a page. "There's more. Look at the secondary account." Another statement. Smaller amounts this time. Regular deposits of 2,000, 3,000. But it was the name on the account that made my vision blur. Nia Reeves. My daughter. "She's been receiving payments from your ex-husband's business account for 2 years. She's apparently listed as a consultant, though there's no record of what services she provided." I couldn't breathe. Nia knew. She'd been taking money, stolen money, while watching me lose everything, while sitting in that courtroom on his side, while telling me to leave my own home. Mr. Price touched my arm gently. "Miss Reeves, I know this is painful, but if we're going to build a case, we need to document everything." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. What happens next? Miss Holt closed the folder. We file formal fraud complaints with the credit bureaus, the state attorney's office, and potentially the FBI if the amounts justify federal charges. You'll need to give a full statement. We'll need copies of everything: your marriage certificate, divorce decree, any communication you have with your ex-husband or daughter. Will I still be responsible for the debts? Not if we prove fraud, but until then, technically, yes. The weight of it crushed down on me again. Miss Holt's voice softened. Miss Reeves, I've worked financial fraud cases for 19 years. I've seen people destroyed by this, but I've also seen people come back. If you're willing to fight, we can fix this. I looked at Mr. Price, at the man my father had saved decades ago, at the stranger willing to fight for me because of a kindness he never forgot. I'll fight, I whispered. Miss Holt stood up. Good. Then let's get started. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document, every signature, every piece of evidence that Jerome had systematically destroyed my life while pretending to love me. And with every page, every revelation, a new feeling grew inside me. Not just anger, not just betrayal. Something colder. Something that felt like clarity. By the time we finished, the sun was setting outside the conference room window, and I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him win.
2 days later, I made the drive back to New Jersey. I'd rehearsed what I'd say 100 times in my head during the 3-hour drive. I'd imagined her face, her excuses, her defenses. I wanted to believe there was an explanation that would make sense, that maybe Jerome had lied to her too. But I'd seen the bank statements. I'd seen 2 years of deposits. Nia hadn't been tricked. She'd been paid. Her townhouse was in a quiet neighborhood in Cherry Hill, the kind of place with neat lawns and mailboxes that all matched. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 10 minutes, staring at her front door. The door I'd helped her paint when she first moved in. The home I'd celebrated with her when she got the keys. Finally, I got out. I knocked 3 times. When she opened the door, her expression shifted immediately. Not surprise, but something closer to annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you." She glanced behind her like she was checking if anyone was listening. "This isn't a good time. Nia, please, 5 minutes." She sighed and stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She crossed her arms. "What is it?" I pulled the folded bank statements from my purse. My hands shook as I held them out. Did you know your father forged my signature?" Her eyes flicked to the papers, then back to my face. For just a second, I saw it. Guilt, fear, something that looked almost like shame. But then her jaw tightened. Dad said he'd fix it. The words hit me like a slap. Fix it? Nia, he destroyed my credit. He took out loans in my name. He said you wouldn't understand. Her voice rose slightly. He said you always tried to stop him from getting ahead, that you were holding him back. So you believed him. Why wouldn't I? She shot back. You were always arguing with him, always questioning everything he did. Maybe if you'd supported him more. I supported him for 34 years. My voice cracked. I signed things I didn't understand. I trusted him. And he used that trust to steal from me. She looked away. It's more complicated than that. Then explain it to me. I stepped closer. Explain why you've been taking money from him, money he stole using my name. Her face flushed. I needed help. I was trying to build a life.
With stolen money? It wasn't stolen. Yes, it was. I held up the statements. He took out a loan in my name, funneled the profits into his account, and then paid you. You knew, Nia. You had to know. She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. Mom, I'm tired of being in the middle. Dad said you'd blame us if things got messy. So yes, I took the money. I was trying to build something for myself instead of being stuck between the two of you. Something inside me shattered. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet final breaking of the last piece of hope I'd been holding on to. You're my daughter. How could you choose him over me when you knew what he was doing? Because he's never treated me like I'm the problem, she snapped. You always made everything so hard, so serious. Dad he made things easy. I stared at her, at this woman I'd raised, this stranger standing in front of me. Easy, I repeated softly. He made things easy by lying, by stealing, by destroying me. She looked down. I didn't think it would go this far, but you knew it was wrong. She didn't answer. I folded the papers slowly and put them back in my purse. My hands were steady now. My voice was steady. I came here hoping you'd tell me you didn't know, that he'd lied to you too. I looked at her one last time. But you did know, and you chose him anyway. I turned and walked back to my car. She didn't call after me, didn't apologize, didn't say anything. I drove away from that townhouse, from that neighborhood, from the daughter I thought I knew, and I didn't cry. I didn't break down, because something had shifted inside me. For 34 years, I had swallowed hurt to keep my family together. But my family was gone, and I was done swallowing anything. When I got back to the motel that night, there was a voicemail on my phone. Mr. Price. Miss Reeves, please call me as soon as possible. Something came up during the deeper file review. You need to see this. His voice sounded different, urgent, almost excited. I called him back immediately. Can you come to the bank tomorrow morning, early, before we open? What is it? I can't explain over the phone, but Miss Reeves, I think your father left you something.
I arrived at Sunfield Bank at 7:30 the next morning. The parking lot was empty except for Mr. Price's car. He was waiting by the front door, coffee in hand, looking like he hadn't slept much. "Thank you for coming so early," he said, unlocking the door. "You said my father left me something?" He nodded, but didn't explain, just led me through the quiet bank to that same conference room where Miss Holt had spread out all those documents 2 days ago. This time, there was only one folder on the table. Old, faded brown, the kind they don't make anymore. Mr. Price gestured for me to sit. He sat across from me, hands folded, and I could see something in his expression, nervousness mixed with something that looked almost like joy. "When Miss Holt and I were doing the deep file review on your accounts," he began, "we were cross-referencing your Social Security number against all historical records in our system." He opened the folder carefully. "We found something that should have been migrated to our current database years ago, but wasn't. It was sitting in an old internal branch system that got archived when we upgraded in 2005. He pulled out a single document, yellowed paper, typed on an actual typewriter. A trust account agreement. My father's signature at the bottom, and my name listed as the sole beneficiary. Your father opened this account the year he passed away. It's what we used to call a private trust savings account. He made deposits regularly, small amounts, $50 here, $100 there. My hands trembled as I reached for the paper.
He left instructions that the account was to remain sealed until you needed it, not at a certain age, not on a specific date, but when you needed it. I looked up at him, confused. How would anyone know when I needed it? And they wouldn't. That's why it stayed sealed. But when you came in to open a new account and we ran your information, the system flagged it. You were accessing our bank in a moment of financial crisis. That triggered the release conditions. My throat tightened. How much is in the account? He slid another paper across the table. A balance statement. I stared at the number and my vision blurred. Not millions, not enough to never worry again, but enough. Enough to find a place to live that wasn't a motel room, enough to hire a real lawyer and fight back, enough to rebuild from the ground up, enough to breathe. Your father set up the account to accumulate interest. Over 26 years, even modest deposits compound significantly. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. All this time, while I thought I'd lost everything, my father had been protecting me from beyond the grave. There's one more thing, Mr. Price said softly. He pulled out a sealed envelope from the folder. My name was written on the front in my father's handwriting, careful, steady letters I recognized instantly. This was attached to the trust documents. Instructions were to give it to you when the account was released. My hands shook as I took it. I opened it slowly, almost afraid of what I'd find inside. The letter was short, 1 page, but every word felt like my father's voice speaking directly to me. My dearest Lorraine, if you're reading this, it means you faced something difficult, something that brought you to the bank looking for help. I don't know what it is. I don't know when it will happen. But I know my daughter, and I know you're strong enough to survive whatever comes. This money isn't much, but it's honest. Every dollar came from work I'm proud of. Use it to build something good. Use it to remember that your worth isn't measured by what people take from you, but by what you refuse to let them steal. Your integrity, your kindness, your strength. I'm proud of you. I always was. Love, Daddy. I pressed the letter to my chest and finally let myself cry. Not from grief, not from pain, but from something I hadn't felt in so long I'd almost forgotten what it was. Relief. Mr. Price stood and quietly left the room, giving me space. I sat there for a long time, holding my father's letter, feeling his presence in a way I hadn't since the day he died. He'd known. Somehow he'd known I'd need this, and he'd made sure I wouldn't face it alone. When I finally walked out of that conference room, I wasn't the same woman who'd walked in weeks ago, broken and desperate. I was my father's daughter, and I was done being afraid.
With Miss Holt's help and the backing of Sunfield Bank's fraud department, I filed official complaints with every agency that mattered. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures on loan documents, unauthorized credit card applications, bank records showing Jerome funneling money from accounts opened in my name, text messages between him and Nia discussing the money she'd received. The state attorney's office took the case within 2 weeks. Jerome was charged with identity theft, forgery, financial fraud, and fraudulent misrepresentation. The assistant district attorney, a woman named Miss Chin, who had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen every con in the book, told me they rarely saw cases this clear-cut. Your ex-husband didn't just commit fraud, she said. He documented it. Bank transfers, emails, text messages. He kept records of his own crimes. Apparently, arrogance makes people sloppy. Naya's involvement complicated things. Because she'd received money but hadn't initiated the fraud, the prosecutors offered her a deal: financial restitution, mandatory financial counseling, and probation. No jail time. Part of me wanted to be angry about that,
wanted her to face the same consequences her father did. But mostly, I just felt sad. Sad that the daughter I'd raised had chosen money over integrity. Sad that she'd have to live with that choice for the rest of her life. The trial lasted 4 days. I had to testify, had to sit on that witness stand and recount every lie, every forged signature, every moment I trusted someone who was actively destroying me. Jerome sat at the defense table in a suit I recognized, the one I helped him pick out for our anniversary dinner 8 years ago. He didn't look at me once. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, followed by supervised release and mandatory restitution. He was ordered to pay back every dollar he's stolen, plus penalties. Miss Chen told me later that Latrice, the woman from the trucking business, had disappeared the moment the charges were filed, blocked his calls, moved out of state, wanted nothing to do with him once the money dried up. Funny how that works. How people vanish when you've got nothing left to offer them. I didn't go to the sentencing hearing. I didn't need to see his face when the judge handed down the verdict. I'd already moved on. Using my father's trust money, I found a small condo in Maryland near the waterfront. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with enough light to grow herbs on the windowsill, and a balcony that overlooked the bay. It was quiet. It was mine. I joined a book club at the local library, started volunteering again, met people who didn't know my story, didn't ask questions, just welcomed me in. I learned how to sleep without anxiety clawing at my chest. I learned how to smile again without it feeling like a mask. And one evening, about 6 months after everything ended, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset turn the water gold and orange. I thought about my father, about the shelf that collapsed when Mr. Price was 17, about the split-second decision to push a kid out of the way, about how one act of kindness, one moment of integrity, had reached across 26 years to save me when I needed it most. I whispered into the quiet air, "Daddy, thank you." And I swear, I felt him smiling back.
The first morning I woke up in my condo, I lay in bed for a long time, just listening to the silence. Not the motel silence, thin walls and strangers arguing next door. Not the old house silence, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment. Real silence, the kind that feels like peace. I made coffee in my own kitchen, sat on my balcony in the cool morning air, watched boats drift across the water, their sails bright against the blue sky. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to. No one controlling the bank account, no one demanding I sign things I didn't understand, no one making me feel small in my own life. I started building routines, small things. Wednesday morning walks along the waterfront, Friday evenings at the book club where we argued passionately about whether the protagonist in our latest read deserved redemption. Saturday afternoons at the community center, helping kids with their reading homework the way I used to before everything fell apart. People started recognizing me. "Morning, Miss Reeves. See you Friday, Miss Reeves. The kids loved that book you recommended, Miss Reeves." I became part of something again. Not someone's wife. Not someone's mother. Just me. 3 months into my new life, I got a letter from Naya. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It was short, 2 paragraphs, an apology that felt more obligatory than genuine, a request to talk sometime that came with no specifics, no real accountability. I read it twice, then I folded it, put it in a drawer, and went about my day. Maybe one day I'd be ready to have that conversation. Maybe I'd be ready to forgive. But not today. Today, I was focused on the life I was building, the one that didn't require me to shrink myself to make room for other people's selfishness. Mr. Price called occasionally to check in, not as my banker, just as someone who cared.
We'd have coffee sometimes at the cafe near the library. He'd tell me about his teenage daughter who was applying to colleges. I'd tell him about the book club's latest dramatic debate. We never talked much about what happened. We didn't need to. We both understood that some debts can't be measured in dollars, that some kindness echoes across generations. One afternoon, I was reorganizing my bookshelf when I found my father's business card again, the one that had started everything. I held it for a long time, running my thumb over the faded ink. Charles Reeves, Reeves Building Supply. A man who'd built his reputation on honesty, who'd saved a 17-year-old kid from a falling shelf and changed the trajectory of his entire life, who opened a trust account for his daughter decades before she'd need it, just in case. I placed the card in a frame and hung it by the front door. A reminder, not of what I lost, but of what I came from, and what I refuse to let anyone take from me ever again. Life has a way of showing you who people really are when money enters the room, or power, or fear. I learned that love without honesty is just control wearing a costume. That family without loyalty is just people who happen to share your last name. That trusting blindly doesn't make you noble. It just makes you vulnerable. But I also learned something else. The seeds of integrity you plant today don't disappear just because you do. They grow in places you'll never see. They bloom in moments you'll never witness. They save people decades after you're gone in ways you never imagined. My father pushed a 17-year-old out of the way of a falling shelf, and 26 years later, that 17-year-old saved me when I had nothing left. That's the kind of legacy that outlives betrayal. That's the kind of goodness that compounds like interest in a forgotten bank account. Quiet, steady, waiting for the moment you need it most. So plant kindness even when it costs you. Build integrity even when no one's watching. 'Cause you never know whose life you're saving. You never know who'll remember your name when the world forgets. And you never know when that memory will reach back through time and pull someone you love out of the darkness. That's not luck. That's legacy.